Hello and welcome to this session. Thanks for joining. In this session, I want to show how a calculation view can be used to integrate different types of data objects. And in particular, I will focus on you can use calculation views to use data lake files. You can make use of data in other HDI containers. So we touch also on the topic of cross-container access and also use machine learning functions. Now, for this particular example, I created here a data set which is consisting of a lot of numbers. The idea here is that I have a large data set where most of the data is data and the rest is some kind of outlier. So how did I create it? I used a normal distribution and assumed that data coming from the normal distribution consist of make up the data, while data points that are coming from a uniform distribution make up the outliers. And of course, the outliers are much less or fewer in numbers than the data. Now, the idea is that in the calculation view, we consume this file from a data lake and then have a machine learning function doing the outlier detection so that we remove the outliers. Now, let me switch over to Business Application Studio where we want to create the calculation view. So this is now an empty space. So nothing is in yet, but we will change that. So the first thing that we want to do now is we create an HDI container from which we will access the HANA Data Lake files. Now, let's create an HDI container. We use this SAP HANA database project. By the way, perhaps I should say this development space was created just using the normal template for HANA native application. So now I have the option to create a SAP HANA database project here, which is what I do. I take the data container name because this is where we will have the data in later, and I accept the defaults. Everything is fine here, so we can just press finish and wait till this container is generated. And as I said, we will then define there or access from there the data lake files, which means we need a kind of virtual table that we will define in this HDI container. So the files are currently generated and the services generated. So let's switch to the perhaps, yeah, okay, it's coming now. So we have here our SAP HANA project. Well, let me just hide this one, that we can focus more on the project here. Okay, so you see here we have a container connection now generated that connects our project files with a database. Now in this project file, as I said, we want to use as a data container. We need a virtual table. So let me create a new folder just for structuring it a little bit. So virtual tables. And in this, we will create a virtual table definition. So let's call it VT data, which be virtual table. Because of the extension, it knows that's the virtual table. So let me just open it in a text editor because it's perhaps easy to or interesting to see here how this definition looks like. So we want to create a virtual table, VT data. It has a column ID, it has a column value, and a column type, and these are the data types. And it's based on the remote source that's pointing to the data lake. And this is our file that I've shown before. It's delimited by semicolon. Yeah. So now if I press deploy, you hopefully also expect that it will fail, because otherwise I could just create a virtual table on any source that I want, and I would have access to the data. So this is the correct answer. You're not authorized to access the remote source. So how do we deal with that now? We need somehow access or the privilege to create a virtual table. Now, who can give this privilege? It's the owner of the remote source from the beginning. So the owner of the remote source in our case was the dbadmin user. We will look at that very soon. But before we do so, let's also get clear who needs this authorization. We want to create this virtual table inside an HDI container, which means the virtual table will be owned by the object owner of the HDI container. And this is the database user which needs this authorization to create the virtual table. How can we grant privileges to the object owner? One way is using an HTTP grants file. So perhaps let's do this first. What do we need to it? I mean, at least a kind of role would be nice, I guess. So let's create a role first. Okay, so here we are working with the database admin user. Let's create the role first. Create role, create virtual table on Data Lake Files. Now, first, okay. Oh, it's still existing from a previous test. So, okay, let me just delete it quickly. So that we stop clean. Okay, so now I create the role. And now with this role, I want to grant the create virtual table. So I grant create virtual table on remote source. Now I take the remote source name from here. And I want to grant it to the role. Now we have a role. So in theory, we could put this role into the HP grants. So let's just do it. Let me create also a folder here, grants. And now I create here an HTTP grants file. Show tables, HTTP grants. And now we have here, it's a global role. So let's assign it here to the object owner. And let's also assign it to the application user so the application user can also see it at least. I mean, that's now a little bit more privileged than you would actually need, but it makes our life easier. And if the object owner has it, it's anyway available to the application user somehow. Okay, now if I press deploy, again, we should see a failure. And now, why would we see a failure now? The reason is we don't have a service selected here that could do the granting. So we need a service that can grant this role now to the object owner. So let's create a service, but for this service, we need a user that can do the granting. So before creating the service, let's create a user that has the privilege to grant this role. So let's create user. It's a user provided service, so let's call it user virtual table. Now let me take a not really randomly generated password, but at least for better password and set user group. We take the default user group. So we have now a database user. Now to disable that the user doesn't have to change the password for first log on, and also it's not suddenly disabled. For easiness now, I just disable the password lifetime. And now comes the crucial part. I grant the remote the role to this user. And because the user should grant it to the object owner, we need the with admin option so that the role can be granted by this database user UPS VT. Okay, now we are set to create a service based on this database user that will do the granting of the role to the object owner. So let's do it. We are here now. We add here as database connection. We want to create a user-provided service instance. The service instance, let's call it also UPS VT, or how did we call? Yeah, VT. Then the username is user service VT. That's the username from here, and we have the password. We have here. So now let's this and let's edit. Okay. So yeah, you should have created it. I don't know why you didn't create it. But let's just quickly check. So yeah, it's created. For whatever reason, it did not find it. Okay. Anyway, now we have bound this service, and we have here now the service. So let me just remove this useless thingy. Okay, so we have the user-provided service, and now in our HTTP grants file, we can now refresh and should see the bound service, user-provided service VT. And with that, we can now deploy it. So the user-provided service user will be used to do the granting of the role that we specified in the HTTP grants file to the object owner and the application user in this case. So we're set here, and now we should have the privileges to deploy the virtual table. So let's do it. And we did it. So now we have a virtual table here. And the next step is we want to create another container. So let's just do it, but new from template again. We take SAP HANA database. Now let's call it analytics container, because that's what we want to do. We want to do the analysis there and take the data from the data container that we created before. So also here, let's just take the default, it should be fine. And now we will have another container with which we want to access the other container. So what do we need for that? In the first place is a synonym that's referring to the other to the object in the other container, because in HDI you need a synonym to refer to objects that are outside of your HDI container. When I define the synonym, you will very soon see that again it will fail because we don't have the privileges, which is again, of course, intended, because you should not be able to just access something by saying I want to. So let's do it now. So synonyms. And to refer to the other container, we first need a connection. Now, because it's another HDI container, we can make use of the HDI connection. So let's, I mean, you see here, sorry, I show it here. You see here the data container service. So this data container service, which is used in the data container to deploy, we now bind to our connection service, to our analytics container. So let's do it. And it's an existing HDI container, and we use the data container. Let's add it. Now you see we have the connection to the other database container. Actually, let me show you differently. I think that's perhaps the more interesting one. So I don't create here a folder for the synonyms, but what I do is I directly create the calculation view. In that way, the calculation view will take care for me to create the synonyms as well. So I don't have to do it manually. So let's do analyze calculation view. I missed the dialog. Okay, here's the dialog. So let's create a projection. In a projection, I'll add now, I have now the option to use another service, because this is the service that we have bound here. So I can select now this service and ask for what objects are in this other container. Okay, there's, not surprisingly, our VT data. And now we take the option of creating synonym. And okay, the synonym name is proposed here. We have also the option to generate HTTP grants file. So let's just do it. But of course, I said that before, just creating a synonym is not enough. You need some authorizations for accessing it. So this time we have an HDI service that can grant us these privileges, but at the moment we don't have roles that this HDI service could grant. So let's create these roles first. So we go here now to the data container again. Now let's create folder roles, and let's create a new role called create ET sharp, because it's with grant option. So, and now we do the hash to make sure that we can grant also with grant option. So as an object, we want to take the VT data, and as I said, for the object owner, we want a select with grant option. So let's create it. Now we have a role that will allow us to grant select on the virtual table. Yeah, let's do the same again. Or we could also copy it. So show a different way of doing it. Let's name it here to VT shop, just VT. And let's also rename it here then, that we don't have the hash. The object privileges, we change it to select. And yeah, we don't need a schema reference now, so we can just generate it. Okay, now we have two roles, and that's what we actually needed here. We needed a role that we grant to the object owner. So let's take it. so the sharp one, and we want to have the other one as well for the application users. So now we can press finish, and what you see now is that a synonym is generated and an HTTP grants file. So let's have a look at the synonym first. So you see normal synonym definition, and if we look at the HTTP grants file, you see also we have the two granted roles here. Okay, now let's clean it up here a bit. So we are now in the projection one, and as I said, we want to do an outlier removal. So let's add a table function node here. We have the incoming data here, and now we need a table function. Now for the table function, let me just get the definition, because I don't want to create now write the table function myself. So one moment, sorry. Okay, now I have it. Okay, so let's create here the table function. So perhaps first the folder again, functions, table, functions, and in this, let's create outlier detection. And this is now just copied, so let's also rename it here. So what happens here? We have incoming data, an ID, a feature that should be used to decide whether it's an outlier or not, and we have a contamination, which basically gives an indication of how many outliers do we expect. And the rest is then basically filling the parameters for the isolation forest option to calculate the outliers. Now, if I try to deploy it, you should, again, or I don't know whether you should, but at least we will have an authorization error, of course, again, because what we are doing here is we are accessing a procedure that's not inside this container. So first of all, we need a synonym for it. And second, we also need the authorizations to access it. So, I mean, I can show you that it will fail, but you can believe me. So let's now indeed create the synonyms folder. So just to show you, yeah, we have, it's not provided by any files, which means we need a synonym for it. So let's create a synonym. For PAL functions. So now to create the correct synonyms here, let me just copy and paste it. The object name is just the one without the S prefix here, and it's in schema sys IL. Then we have a second one, which is called the function predict. We have here, and we have sys IL. So now, if I deploy, now we should expect an authorization error, because I'm just referring to a function. And why should I have authorization to it? I need select or execute for it. So now we do a very similar thing that we did before by using the user provided service to bring in data privileges into a container. Last time we did it for the virtual table. Now we do it for these functions. So it's pretty similar to this one. So let's just copy it. So we create a role, create this time it's execute PAL functions. We want to grant execute on sysrfl dot. Now let me copy this to. Now we have the role again to the role. I didn't execute the previous line, so obviously the role does not exist. Now we also need the second function, second execute on predict. Now we need a database user. We could use the same database user, but it's from a security perspective cleaner to differentiate what user has which privileges. So let's call it PAL. We take the same password, which is of course also not so good, but makes it easier for the demo here. And then we grant the new role to this user. So I'm not sure whether I execute now everything, so let's just do it again. Okay, so everything worked. So we have a new user, the UPS PAL, and we have the password here. So we can create the user provided service in Business Application Studio. Now we are here, we are an analytics container, and we want to add here a user provided service. So create user provided service, UPS PAL, we said. The username is UPS PAL, password I just copy here, and yeah. So we also need procedure grantor. So HTTP grants file. So we can also generate that already. Okay. So now we have here the user PAL connected, which means now we can use this user in the HTTP PAL grants file. So that has been generated. So we have here the grants file. Again, it's a global role. So let's this one. So let's put it here. And for the application user, we also grant it. And we grant it with a user provided service, PAL. Yeah, that's already filled in because we have generated it. So we can deploy it. And now the application user will have the privileges to run the execute on these functions. So, which means now we can deploy these synonyms successfully because we have the privileges, which now means we can deploy this function as well. And with this function, we can now add this function here and I think we called it outlier detection. Okay, so we finish here. And now in the mapping, we see the definition of the table function. And I forgot here to map these these columns. So now we have these values here. And we map the incoming data of the ID to this input parameter of the table function, and the value, which is our outlier or data, that should be removed. The outlier should be removed, obviously. We map to this second input parameter of the table function. Now we also have another scalar input parameter of the function. Just to show you here, we have here a scalar input parameter, and that's what you see here. So to fill that, we create an input parameter because we need a scalar parameter. Let's call it contamination. And as a default value, let's give it the value of 0.05. And now we can also map this input parameter here. And with that, we can map it to the aggregation, map all through, and deploy it successfully, hopefully. So with that, we have now used a virtual table. If that points to a data lake file, we have used, and actually we use that via a data container. So the idea is we have one HDI container which provides all the data. We have here another container, an analytics container that uses this data. So we did here some cross-container access via a synonym that points to a virtual table, that points to a data lake file. We used the table function here, and we created, and now we could look at the data. Actually, now we could already do it, but at the moment, all that we get here is the outcome of the table function. And what is lost here is, for example, information about the real value. So let's just add that as well. So I put here join, and in this join, I add this VT data again. To enrich. Oh, sorry, I need a little bit. My screen is now a little bit unfortunate. Okay, so I added in between. And now I join with the table function data outcome. So I join the ID. The ID is 1-to-1, so let's do it for consistency. So we take the 1-to-1. And now we enrich it basically. So we get for each ID the score and the label of the table function, but we still have the value and the type. Let's check for the mapping. Let's map the value here so that we see the value that is classified as outlier or non-outlier. And with that, let me deploy it. I use Control D to just as a shortcut instead of always moving up there to deploy. So it's deployed, and now I can run a data preview. So that I can clean that now a little bit up here. Now, first I get the question about the input parameter. So I could change it here, but let's just keep it for the moment as a contamination value for the outlier detection algorithm. Now it's coming up in a graphical display. So let's, okay, actually I should have changed the label, which is from an outlier detection algorithm, a definition whether it's -1 or 1, to an attribute, which I didn't do, which is a little bit inconsistent now if I use it now as an attribute more. But anyway, I will show you how you can do that if you want. And now we have here the value as a function of the label. So let's say we take the average. And you see now, if If the algorithm determines the value as an outlier, -1, then the values are indeed a little bit higher than if it was determined as a data point. And that's what you expect based on how the data was created, that the real data have a lower average value than the outliers. And, you can also show that, of course, graphically. Yeah, the difference here is not very much, which also probably depends a little bit on the contamination value. But I guess you got the idea about how you can make use of detecting outliers with this function and then working on the non-outliers. I mean, you could now do a filter for the label. So, for example, first of all, we probably should change the label to an attribute instead of a measure. And then you can, for example, here in a filter for the label equals 1. And with that, then you would exclude the outlier, the values that have been classified as outlier. And with that, I conclude this presentation. I hope you got the impression about how it is possible to use different data type objects, data lake files, machine learning, access different data in other HDI containers, and integrate all of that in one calculation view. Thanks for joining and listening, and have a nice day. Thanks.